Firstly and sincerely, I hope everyone is healthy and well. My grandma Cecilia used to say, Luke, if you haven't got your health, you don't have anything. And for someone who lived through the Spanish flu, I think she knows what she was on about. So we do hope you're well. We are, on behalf of the team at Nova and the people that I lead and we lead, we're really pleased to offer this gift of learning and development in a time where, as the screen says, where budgets are cut or significantly reduced. It's great to be able to come together at this point, and we've heard that a lot in the last few weeks. I think as leaders, it can be quite lonely in your roles, especially in isolation. It can be even lonelier. So it's really good to come together and ask and see how everyone's getting on, but also learn and get some better understanding of how we're coming across as leaders in this time. I'm sure you'll all agree it's been quite an emotional period of leadership for those who are, all of you who are in those roles, and our actions and our words are magnified massively across this period in terms of people are looking to us for some sort of assurity or certainty of what's going on. So it's critical that we have an understanding and how we adapt our communication behaviours across this period. So we are, as I said, really looking forward to it. We've been overwhelmed by the uptake has been exceptional on this. So there's, I think the content series that's been created by Daniel Murray specifically for our industry is right on point. I think you've made a great commitment of accepting the invitation as well as turning up to the webinar, because I'm sure we've all done that once or twice where we've run out of time or there's too much screen time happening, but this is definitely worth the investment, I believe. We've worked with Daniel for the last just over a year now, and across all levels of our business, our leadership teams, as well as our individuals and one-on-ones, he offers all those services, and has really taught us a lot around the modern leadership approach and how we adapt it to the people that we lead. And I think we all know what we're talking about in terms of generationally, it has shifted and changed in the last little while. Daniel's background, for those who don't know, is he's a self-confessed maths nerd who's taken on a lot more skills over the years, and his career his corporate career led him down to work with one of the biggest financial businesses in Australia called CBA. I'm sure you're all familiar with them, in both corporate strategy as well as management at quite a senior level. So he's got a lot of hands-on experience in leadership and leading people, but has developed and gone out and created a new toolkit for us to learn from around behavioural economics, which he's an expert on, as well as neuroscience and emotional intelligence. So it is, as I said, with great pleasure that we can offer this series for you as key partners of Nova Entertainment. We look forward to discussing with you across this time. There is a Q&A button on the Zoom there, which if you could use the Q&A for any questions you've got along the way. Jess, Josh and I will have mics open to help prompt Daniel across this session, as he'll focus mostly on the content, not on the comments bar, which you'd hope, because otherwise he's defying the law of men being able to do two things at once. So the Q&A, if you do have questions, whack your questions in there. We'll get to them. If not, we'll capture them. We'll save them for the end as well. But good opportunities. As I said, we are all in this together. We are all in leadership positions or learning to be in leading positions. So any questions you've got, it might actually prompt someone else. So please do get involved, and we'll get to them by the end of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Daniel. Hopefully going to pick up some great skills you can use almost immediately. And as I said, please enjoy this gift on behalf of Nova and, of course, Daniel Murray. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. And just a big call out to Nova and yourself and the team there who've been able to pull this together in a pretty short period of time and get such a great engagement from your audience. I think is a testament to the work you're doing and the commitment you have to your clients and to your people to continue to invest in them in these times. What I want to start with here, and it will be a lot about how do we cut costs and manage that well, but I want to start by just asking you, who are you being at the moment? How are you showing up? What I mean by that is the world's changed. This was me just late last year doing what I love, speaking on a stage at a conference in front of almost 2,000 people. And I absolutely love doing this sort of work. The challenge is there are no more conferences at the moment. And so the opportunity to do what I love and to show up the way I had been doesn't really exist in the same way anymore. But that doesn't mean that the needs of my clients and those who I serve have gone away. And I've got to continue to remind myself of how I show up each day and how I log on to these webinars, how I really lead as a leader. And I want to take you through a little model and ask you how you're showing up. This is a simple model, be, do, have. And in this model, order is critically important. You see, when we feel helpless and stressed, we usually think about things in this way. When I have a great job, then I'll be able to do all the things that I really want to do, and then I'll be happy. When I have lots of opportunities, then I'll be able to do the work to bring those to life, and then I'll be successful. And we think we're going to be once everything else falls into place. The second option I see people take these days is to be the fighter. They just do. I'm going to do lots of stuff. And if I do lots of stuff, then I'll have some opportunities. Then I'll be happy. Then I'll be successful. And it'll happen at the end. And what I know is that the critical thing for leaders in these times is to start with be. Who are you going to be? Who are you going to show up as? Because who you decide to show up as, well, that determines what action you take, what you do. And then that flows on to the outcomes that you'll have. And so what I want you to do is just take 30 seconds, have a bit of a reflection inside, and just think, who are you going to be for this next hour, for this next day, however long this period's going to go on for you in your life? How are you going to show up? What's going to be your focus? And be intentional about it. Don't let this just be a reaction. Don't let this be something that sits in the background and you're not fully engaged with it. Actually have a real consideration. I'm going to commit that for this next hour, my be is going to be absolutely in service to you. I'll be here to serve you in whatever way you need from me. And that means we have to do lots of Q&A, that I'm here for you. That means we don't get to all your questions, then please send them through and I'll answer them. I'm here to be in service of you, and that's my intention for the next hour. So just have a little think about what you're going to be for this next hour, and just pop it in the chat box and let everyone else get this sense of how we're turning up to this session. Once you've done this, I want you to write this word down somewhere, and I want you to keep it in your mind and have it as a focus. Have it as something you can reflect on as we go through, because things will pop up. Emails will come in, other distractions will happen, and I want this to be your anchor so that you can get the most out of these sessions we have together. You see, the way people show up at the moment, particularly in crisis, is quite interesting. I like to make little analogies to the things, and I can see 3 types of ways that people are handling this crisis from a leadership position. The first is the echidna. What the echidna does is, under pressure and stress, they curl up into a ball and they try and protect themselves. They hide from the horrible outside world, and they try and become safe by hiding away. And unfortunately, everyone around them, and as leaders, everyone who needs them, all they feel are their sharp barbs. And so when things change and they finally become able to unravel, they're empty. They're surrounded by no one, and there's nothing there for them. The second approach that I see people take is the emu approach. The emu goes through 2 stages. The first is head in the sand, complete denial. And then when things start going bad, they run around like crazy, getting their feathers plucked. And you might know some people who are acting as the echidna or acting as the emu. And certainly we're seeing examples of the consequences of that leadership in political realms across the world. And what I think we need to do at this point is take the perception of the shepherd. The shepherd finds their flock and they look to guide them and support them. They look for ways to help guide this group to safety. And it's not that they don't have fear. You see, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action in the face of fear. And what we need from leaders right now is not an overwhelming, overconfident sense of ability. We need honest leaders who are courageous, who know that it's going to be tough, but they know their role as a leader is to gather their herd and help them through. And so as we choose to take one of these options, and it's always our choice as to how we show up, I want you to use these ideas as you start to navigate through these really tough times. How are you showing up? Are you there for others, or are you there to protect yourself? Because the decisions you make in the next few weeks are really going to shape the next few years. We're going through a very challenging time now, and all economic forecasts suggest that it's not about to get a whole lot better anytime soon. We need to make decisions right now to prepare for a really long, sustained period of challenge. And we need to restructure and rethink about our businesses, our livelihoods. We need to rethink about a whole bunch of things now, and the decisions we make are going to be really critical. So the main decision I really wanted to focus on today is how do you manage costs, and how do you set up your business for this new world where the old rules don't apply anymore. We can be really clear about one thing: whatever's coming is not going to be what was. We're not about to roll back to the good old days. We know from history that just doesn't happen, and we've got to prepare for a future world. And so today's session is really about how do we reshape our business models, how do we cut some costs, how do we do all of this in a way that doesn't destroy our culture and doesn't destroy our business in the process. And the first critical step in this process is to think about what are your intentions. Be really clear on what are the needs you've got. Where do you need to get to during this next period to be prepared for the longer term? And while that's a hard question, it's really important you get some of that clarity early on. The first part of this is, of course, knowing your numbers and working with your finance and accounting team to really dig into every part of your business. Whenever I've done cost-cutting programs in the past, it's critical that we get as much information about what's going on as possible. And this is an important thing to do. I had the pleasure when I was working for CBA to run a large program of work for a bank in New Zealand called ASB. And ASB was going okay. They were pretty successful at the time. And I was sent there as a consultant to help them make a change. Well, actually, my goal was to help them reduce their cost base by $130 million. And so I know a little bit about the process we need to go through to cut costs. But it wasn't just cutting costs. You see, we had to transform this business in a way that was going to leave it better for the future, not worse. And I'm proud to say that we finished our program, we successfully hit our target, and ASB was rated the best bank in New Zealand for the next few years. The first point, as I said, is getting into this cost-based analysis, and there'll be people within your finance and accounting departments or your accountants who can support you in this, but doing lots of analysis here is important, but I just want to throw in a little word of caution. You see, one of the things that we do is we build big spreadsheets, we put lots of numbers in there, and then we really quickly run to try and start making some changes. And there's a risk in this. A few years ago, I was in France, and I got to cycle up this mountain. Apologies for this photo of my big bum. It's the only one that'll be in this series. But this is my big backside, getting up the final stretch of Mont Ventoux. Now, anyone out there who's a sad middle-aged man in Lycra like me will know that this mountain's pretty special. This is where a lot of Tour de France's are won and lost, and it had always been a big passion and a dream of mine to get to France, get on a bike and give this thing a go. It's about 20 kilometers from the bottom to the top, and it's very steep, about 8-9% gradient. And so it was a bit of an achievement for me to do this. Of course, I wasn't alone. Like every other sad middle-aged man in Lycra, I had a GPS tracker and a heart rate monitor and a GoPro and all this equipment to capture the data. I had to capture the data because then I had to upload it onto Strava and other websites and compare myself against others. And as sad as that may sound, it's a common thing for a person like me to do. Well, what struck me though, as I sat back in our B&B and looked at the data that night, was when you looked at my data, it was completely unremarkable. There was absolutely nothing in it that stood out. I wasn't particularly fast, I wasn't particularly slow. And when you compared my data with the thousands of other people who cycle up this mountain each year, mine was just completely insignificant. And you could just look straight past my numbers as if there was nothing there. The problem here, though, is that wasn't my experience. That wasn't how it felt to me. This had been something I really wanted to do for a long period of time. And as a passionate cyclist, it was a dream. And when I got to the top, I felt an immense sense of pride and satisfaction in achieving this. And that wasn't captured anywhere in the numbers. So when you're going through your financial records, your numbers, when you're working through these numbers of look at where we need to cut our costs, just be careful. Be a little bit cautious, because numbers do not equal value all the time. You know, when we start to turn employees into FTEs and, you know, suddenly a person becomes a 0.67 rather than a real person, it's really easy to lose sight of the real value that's important, that's hidden in that number. And I want to make sure that we're understanding what's valuable before we start making cuts. One simple way we do this with our clients is we start from our customer side. We say, well, what's the impact on them? What do they absolutely love and value? What's value look like in the eyes of our customers? And we really try and focus in and dig hard on understanding that. And once we understand that, the next question is, well, in our outputs, in our products and services, what is it in there that creates that huge amount of value for our customers? And that tells us what we might need to protect. And then we can cycle back from that and say, okay, well, now let's interrogate our inputs, our people, processes, our technology, all the resources that we have. Let's interrogate them from the lens of the things that are critical to support our products and services which deliver the high level of value. We need to make sure that we're looking through a value lens, not just a numbers and a cost-based lens, because it's really easy at this time to cut the wrong things. In my view, cost cutting should be surgery, not butchery. If your approach to cost cutting is everyone has to take 10% across the board, you have to know that there's pockets there that can't take 10%, and there's other pockets in your business that could probably take 40, 50% and not impact on customers. The surgery here is finding those pockets and really being clear on how you're going to go about this and how you're going to sustain value for your clients, for your employees, for all of your stakeholders on the other side of this journey. The second tip I want to share with you is the idea of cost cutting sounds horrible, but we need to reframe it. We need to change it from it being a reaction to a problem to we're actually building a new movement within our business. We're planting the seed for a change in the way we work, in the way we see the world, and the way we see ourselves. We're actually adapting to the environment. We're not reacting to what's going on. And a big part of this, and one of the things I really work hard with all my clients in this space, is how do we develop some guiding principles up front which will balance and guide us and support us as we try and make these decisions and step through. Guiding principles are really, really critical. And we often get them mixed up with values and posters on walls. And I don't want to have a go at anyone's value set, but often I see words like respect and integrity. And if I had a go at my friends back at the banks, every single bank in Australia had a version of the word integrity in their value set before, during, and after the Royal Commission. Having values on the wall is not what I'm talking about. Having guiding principles for how we will make decisions is what I'm talking about here. And let's dive into that a little bit, because how people make decisions is a really critical thing to understand. We typically think that we all are free and we think freely and we make decisions on our own free will. And what we know from neuroscience and psychology is that that's actually not that true. There's four major ways I think about people making decisions or taking action. The first is they just follow the rules. They just do what they're told. And really, you could argue this isn't decision-making necessarily. And if that's your job, is just following the rules, I would suggest that your job's about to be taken by a computer and we won't need you anymore. The second way I see people making decisions is they just do what the group does. They follow the herd. And I'm sure we've all seen examples of this, but there's some really great experiments done. One in the UK, where they had a large hall and they asked a large group of people to walk randomly around in the hall. Now, what they actually did also was get 3 or 4 people they pulled aside and they told them exactly how to walk, which pattern to follow on the ground. And no one else knew this, but within half an hour, everyone in the room was actually following one of these existing patterns, one of these predetermined patterns. The herd had moved and just followed everyone else. And when asked, they said, no, I'm just walking randomly. But as humans, that's not really what we do. We all seen many experiments and examples of people just following what everyone else is doing. And this is important because if we're going to change the way our business operates, we actually need to get that momentum. We need to get everyone starting to follow these new ways of working. Third way in which people make decisions is as they follow authority. And this is a really critical signal for all leaders. What you say and do really matters. There's a great experiment which showed this by a guy named Stanley Milgram. Many of you might have heard of this, but let me just quickly explain it. In one room, there was an experimenter who was asking questions. Sitting next to the experimenter was the test subject. And in a room beside them was another person. The test subject thought this person was acting on their own free will and was attached to an electrical cable. In fact, they were an actor, but the experimenter told the test subject that they would give questions to this person in the next room, and if that person in the next room got the answers wrong, the test subject would give them a shock. He also said that each time they get a wrong answer, I want you to increase the voltage of the shock, and that even if they don't answer, then that's classed as a wrong answer and you'll need to give them a shock. Now, on the machine that Milgram had put in front of the test subjects, the final few buttons actually had warnings above it saying this could be fatal to humans. As the experiment progressed, the actor in the other room would scream and shout and plead for the test subject not to push the button. Yet every time that person got an answer wrong, the test subject would comply. And what Milgram found was that 65% of people delivered a fatal shock to the person in the next room because the experimenter told them so. This experiment was actually based on accounts from the Nazis in Germany during their war crime trials. They said it wasn't our fault because we were just following authority. And there was a real question as to whether will people actually follow authority that much. And as Milgram showed, and as we've seen so many times, in large corporate challenges, in royal commissions, that people will follow the rules, they'll follow authority. So I want you to think about this because as a leader, the actions, the decisions that you make signal to everyone else what's really going on around here and will help them to make those decisions too. So be really clear on what those guiding principles will be. We want people to make choices. That's the fourth way in which we make decisions. We weigh up the options and we make choices, but it's actually the rarest of the ways in which we make decisions. And this is why the idea of guiding principles is so powerful. We need principles to be passed down through authority so people understand how things are going to work around here. We want everyone to start following these general principles, and if we can, we're going to put them into codified rules. But the reality is in these complex worlds, rules are really hard to write in black and white. There's so much grey in our world at the moment. So we want principles which guide us. At ASB, we had guiding principles such as, let's not get rid of anything customers love. We had another guiding principle which was, don't cut people until you get rid of the work that they do. Because what we knew was that it's easier to start firing some of the people. And what I'd seen happen in clients before was they'd fire all of the lowest paid staff, maybe the executive assistants and the PAs, and they'd bump a whole bunch of those people out of their jobs and save a little bit of money. But what obviously happens is the work that they did doesn't go away. So someone we were paying $50,000 or $60,000 a year before, well, their work now gets done by their manager who may be getting paid 2 or 3 times what they were getting paid. And so we're paying a lot more money to do the same work that has to get done. Having guiding principles around how we're going to proceed with this gives us that sense of clarity. And I'm really keen to work with anyone who wants to talk about that. The guiding principles remind us of what is right. They remind us of what the boundaries are and what the right thing to do is. I want to share one more great scientific experiment that was done by a guy out of Duke University called Dan Ariely. Dan asked a classroom of people to do a maths test. And when they'd finished their maths test, the person at the front of the room, the administrator, read out the answers. The students were asked to self-mark the test. Then they were asked to walk up to the front and put their paper in a shredder. Then to tell the administrator how many they got right, and then they would be paid cash based on the number of answers they said. Now, the shredder was set up to only shred the edges of the paper so they could see how many people got actually right. And what they found was that everyone cheated. Almost no one cheated terribly. No one said they got 20 when they only got 5. Almost no one was completely honest. Most people just cheated a little bit. People got 6, they said they got 7 or 8. People got 8, they said they got 9 or 10. They just cheated a little bit. And this was a big worry. Why are people cheating? And how do we stop it was the real question. The best intervention they found was they asked the people taking the test to, before the test, write down as many of the 10 commandments as they could remember. Now, what was interesting is that it didn't matter what denomination people were. Firstly, most people, no one really could remember all of them word for word. But as soon as they were asked to do this task, cheating dropped to 0. At MIT, they asked the students doing this test to read out the MIT honor code. And cheating dropped to 0, despite the fact that MIT didn't have an honor code. They just made it up. And what we see in here is when we can give people guidance that these are the right things to do. Remember that you're a good person and this is what the right thing to do is. When we can set out these guiding principles, they're not rules. They're guiding principles that can work in these grey areas and give people a sense of what's right. It gets them reconnecting with their sense of morality. And in these really challenging times, those guiding principles will be the most important things that you can put into your business to help navigate through, particularly in a cost-cutting environment. The third step in cutting your costs effectively, in my view, is building a really trusted working group. And this is going to sound strange from a consultant, but I would advise not to race out and hire a big team of consultants. My view is that the people who know your business best are in your business right now. The people who are going to be most effective in implementing change in your business are in your business right now. And the people who are going to be able to really connect, engage, and drive this thing through the long term are people in your business. So my advice here is to get a really strong group of some of your most trusted people together and empower them to lead a program of change. Now, you might need advice, you might need support, and I would definitely suggest accessing external consultants and support to help that team through. But make sure it's a team of your trusted people, because the more you can get an internal team to drive this forward, the more buy-in you'll get from them and from everyone else in your organization. Now, just a key point on this, you can share the responsibility, but as a leader, you need to own the accountability. You know, I'm not saying you should abdicate your accountability for this. You absolutely cannot. This is still on you. But you need to share the responsibility and share the load. You're not going to be able to sit in a room with just your CFO or a financial controller, do the numbers and come up with a perfect outcome. What we really need to do is get as many good ideas together and then help your teams, your people to drive this forward. Then you've got to have their back when things get tough. You've got to have their back when things go wrong. It's still going to be on you. But as a leader, you're sharing that responsibility. And this is a critical part of leadership, particularly in these really challenging times. Once we've started to get this group together, we often do an ideation session. We get everyone we can in a room and say, look, here's what we've got to do. We know our numbers now. This is our target. This is where we've got to cut costs. We know our guiding principles. This is how we're going to go about doing this. It's really about these 5 things that are critical as we step through. And then we get everyone in a room and we ask them, so what are your ideas? What are some ideas you've got to help us reduce this cost base, to help us solve this problem? And we're all in this together. And what you find is you'll get far more ideas than you ever dreamed. You'll get tiny little ideas and you'll get big, massive ideas. And sure, you'll get ideas that at first you think, well, that doesn't make any sense, but resist the urge to judge too quickly. You'll also get a whole bunch of ideas which will seem small. And you'll think, wow, we can't, if we've got to save $130 million, then a $10,000, $20,000 saving, it's just not going to move the dial. But the reality is these quick wins are actually really important. They help us build momentum. We often run our clients through a simple prioritization framework. We get all of those ideas, we get hundreds of them, and we quickly, back of an envelope, go, hey, how big do you think the benefits of savings are here? And on a scale of high, medium, low, how easy do you think this thing will be to implement? And we start to map across this simple matrix, and you can use far more sophisticated ones if you want, but at this stage, that's not really our goal. What our goal is to find things that are going to produce savings that are easy to implement, high ease of implementation, and that are going to get runs on the board. And you get your working group to start implementing these quick wins as soon as possible. These quick wins are critical to start getting runs on the board. Every dollar of OPEX you can reduce now accumulates over time and will help you cut costs across your business. And little things really matter. I always think about it this way. If you're going to renovate a house, you've also got to sweep the floors. You've got to do the small things as well as the big things if you want to get the right result. And these quick wins will help you build that momentum. They will help start getting runs on the board. But more importantly than that, they have a bigger impact on the mindsets. When I was doing the work for ASB in New Zealand, one of the ideas that came up was just to reduce diaries. See, the company used to send leather-bound diaries to the high-value customers in the business. And I'm sure many of you have either received or sent something like this before. And one of the ideas that had come out of our session was that if we could take away the diaries, and we sized it, and turned out it was about $180,000 a year being spent on these diaries at the time. Now, I thought this was an obvious quick win. And I took it to the person who ran that area, and I said, Phil, this is one of the ideas. Can we sign this off and get some runs on the board? And he said no. Now, this was very early on in our program. He said no. Now, at that point, there was a whole bunch of things that went on. As a self-confessed maths nerd, I could do the analysis and show that these weren't creating the value. I could go over this person's head to the CEO and get it signed off. There was lots of different things that I could have done, but the challenge wasn't logic here, it was mindset. It was the way he was thinking about the question and the challenge. And so I used this as a really opportune time to challenge him on his mindset. I said, that's fine, Phil, here's a piece of paper. You'll just need to give me 3 names. And those will be the 3 people we'll need to fire so that you can keep the diaries. You see, the challenge here isn't if we're saving money, it's where we're saving money, and you've got to make the decisions. And really quickly, we need to get everyone into that mindset. All the little perks and all these little things that you might think we need to cut, we need to make sure the mindset of that action is framed in this sense of we're doing this because we're focused on what's important, and our guiding principles were to keep people where we could. What we need to do is change the mindsets of our people. This is changing the movement, right? We're changing the mindsets to be, why do we do that? Do we need to do it that way? And do we need to do it at all? We want as many of our people as possible to be asking those questions, interrogating what they're doing. Is this the right thing to be spending our time and money on? Am I doing this, and will this create more value, or will this cost someone else their job? Changing mindsets is the hardest part of a cost program, and trying to do the mechanical work, trying to do the operating model changes without the mental buy-in of your people will lead to much more challenge in the long term. The last thing I want to just focus on here is that the loyalty of your people is earned through your actions, not your words. We have seen terrible examples already of organizations who, I heard of one just last week. They dialed 1,000 of their employees into a Zoom call, and a person, not even a video, it was a voice only came up. It was the executive assistant of the CEO telling everyone they'd lost their jobs. The last day would be Friday. Now, you might think, well, they're leaving anyway, so their loyalty is probably not that important. But most of those people had friends who also worked at that organization. And the impact that has on not just those people who are leaving, not just the external reputation of that company, but of the internal productivity and loyalty of those who remain will be absolutely devastating. Now's a time when you need, as a leader, to really step up with your actions. You need to take those brave leaps. You need to be courageous in the face of fear. Because the reality is there's never been a better time to lead. There's never been a better time to capture your competitors' customers. No matter what industry we're in now, our customers are out there and they're struggling with something. It might not be the same things as they were struggling with a few months ago, and it might not be the same things that we offer them as was a few months ago. But make no mistake, your main competitors, their customers are struggling with something right now. And your ability to help them through this crisis is your biggest opportunity. There's never been a better time to build trust with stakeholders, to gather those around you, to work with suppliers and with other groups and build that trust to navigate through fear. I think this series by Nova Entertainment is a great example of reaching out and saying, we're all in this together. And we don't know how we're going to get through, but we know we're not going to get through alone. And it's a great example of leadership. It's also, there's never been a better time to hire the best talent in the market. There's a lot of great people at the moment who are losing their jobs or feeling unloved by their current employers and who aren't really sure about what's going to happen in the long term. And there's never been a better time for really brave and courageous organisations to lead from the front and say, we're going to get through this and we want to make sure we're getting our best people in front of this. And finally, there's never been a better time to show that you're a leader worth following. There's never been a better time to step up and prove that you're the leader for the time. Now, if we look around the world, there's certainly different leaders of organisations and governments who are struggling and they may have seemed competent at some stage and they're really struggling under this challenge because it's under this sort of pressure that leadership really gets put under the microscope. So the actions you take are going to be critical. But it doesn't mean they need to be grand. Doesn't mean they need to be monumental. Doesn't mean they need to be some beautiful lecture or speech or anything massive. They can be really small. Let me give you an example. When I was about 20, I went backpacking in Thailand. I'd grown up in a pretty poor family and we'd never travelled anywhere. And I was really determined to go travelling overseas. And I found myself on this rattly old train in Thailand. It was an overnight train from Chiang Mai back into Bangkok. And in the morning, as the train was rattling its way through the back streets of Bangkok and the smells of the city pungently sort of woke me up, I looked up to see a woman in a uniform carrying a small wooden money box, and she was walking down the train. What she was doing was going to each passenger who had had a meal on the train overnight and collecting the money for the meal and putting it in the little wooden box. And look, as she approached me, I sort of came to and opened my wallet and realised that I didn't have any cash. At that point, I was a bit worried. It became immediately apparent that her wooden box wasn't PayWave enabled and I wasn't going to be able to use a credit card. And this rush of fear and anxiety came over me. This little voice popped up in my head and sort of said, oh, you stupid kid, you're going to be in so much trouble now. You shouldn't even be here. You're in the wrong place. Why are you doing this? And all of this fear and anxiety, as irrational as it may have been, really swept over me. Now, she must have seen this in my face because at that time she turned around, she walked back down the carriage a few steps. She pulled a little purse out of a small compartment, took out about 300 baht, maybe 10 Australian dollars, put it in the wooden box and smiled at me. As she walked back past me on the train, she put her hand on my shoulder and kept on walking. Now, I'm not sure how much money you make walking up and down the trains in Thailand, but I know it's not enough. It's definitely not enough to pay for the meal for some stupid kid who just can't budget his money properly. But at that moment, this lady saw a man in crisis. She saw a person suffering and in crisis. And as great leaders do, when people are in crisis, they step up and help. She saw an opportunity to make a difference and she took it. Now, that change that she gave me changed my life. For the last 11 years, I've been traveling to Thailand, working with this beautiful charity called Hands Across the Water, and we build orphanages and homes right across Thailand. Personally, I've raised a few $100,000 to help these beautiful kids, and I do it out of such passion and love, and in some ways to say thank you to that lady. I don't know her name, and I would never be able to track her down to say thank you, but she changed my life. And the changes that you need to make for your people don't need to be massive either. They might be small gestures. They might be just reaching out. But the impact that they can have and the legacy of that act of leadership can be massive. The decisions you make in the next few weeks are really going to shape the next few years for you. We want to make sure you're making these decisions in the best way you can. My objective for this series and for all of the work that I'm doing with clients at the moment is to help people make the best decisions they can, to help people be the best leaders they can in these challenging times. We know that that leadership can be lonely and stressful, and at this time in particular, there's all of this extra pressure and sense of urgency, and you're isolated from your networks. You've got less access to do the things that you used to do to relieve some of that stress. And the uncertainty is really challenging people. I was working with one of my clients this week who sells hand sanitizer and paper towel. And I initially thought he must be jumping over the moon, but their challenges around supply and the needs of their communities are really putting pressure on them. So everyone's feeling this stress. And one thing I'd say is leadership doesn't need to be lonely. Anyone who needs some more support and advice, there's a white paper I've written which unpacks the 5 steps we've gone through today on cutting costs without killing culture. And it does it in a far more detailed way, and there's plenty of information there. And you're welcome to have this. Anyone who wants a copy of the white paper, just simply reach out to me, send me an email, and you can get a copy of that. I'm also offering phone call to anyone who needs it. If you need someone to have a chat to, you've got some questions from this session that you didn't want to share with everyone, then feel free to pick up the phone, book in a time, and we'll have a call. And we're also building these leadership cohorts that I'm happy to explain more about as we go through, but I'm trying to find ways in which leaders can come together to share experiences with other people who are going through the similar challenges, but from very different positions, to get lots of different voices and ideas into each other's minds and really to share through this process. And these cohorts are live. We're kicking off a couple right now. And if that's something that you and your leadership team might value from, then please reach out. I'm going to pause now and open up for some questions and answers and conversation. And I really want to thank you all for your attention and time. And I hope you're able to stay in that state that you chose for yourself at the beginning of the session.
If anyone's got any questions or comments, you might just want to just unmute yourself, save your fingers if you've got anything that you want to ask.
I'm not sure they can. I think they have to type.
They have to? Oh, because they're panelists. Okay.
Does anyone come through there?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. We've just got a question from Will. Will the recording of the session be shared later on?
Yes, absolutely. I'm more than happy to send. We can send out the recordings. We'll work with Sarah to get the recording out to everyone and make sure they've got it.
Brilliant. And then the other one is just getting your email address, Dan, which Jason will reach out to you offline and provide you with that email address.
We'll flick up this screen if you like. That's got my email address on there, but feel free to continue asking questions as you need.
Brilliant. Just a comment regarding the white paper. Nina would love to access it, so that's good.
Fantastic. Look, really easy way, Nina, is that website that's the bottom right-hand corner, danielmurrayspeaker.com. If you go to the leadership page on that site, there's a white paper download straight there. It's just free to download. can jump straight on.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that looks like all of the questions at the moment in the Q&A section and in the chat.
Oh, there's more.
Sorry, there's just two further that have come through. So from Lee Foster, if we agree that leaders are defined by their actions and one of those actions during this time is the message they deliver to their teams, how can we truly assess the integrity of those messages when they all appear to be copied and pasted from a corporate comms team?
Yeah.
Lee.
Great question. And look, I'm very much in favour of leaders not using their corporate comms team as a way in which to couch some of these messages. The number one thing people want from you at the moment is authenticity. If we think about the psychological challenges people are going through now, it's fear and uncertainty. And you know, people often say that humans hate change. I don't necessarily agree with that. Like, Jess, when you get to go and buy new clothes or buy a new camera or a phone or whatever, do you feel uncertain and worried about that? No, not really. You're usually excited, right? Even though there's going to be a change. And the reason you're excited is that you're in control of that change. What we don't like is uncertainty. We don't like not knowing what's going to happen. And when we're in a state of uncertainty, we're looking to leaders to give us this sense of certainty, to give us this sense of assurance that everything's going to be okay. And that means for leaders, I think the key message that I'd share is, one, be vulnerable, be open, to say, look, things are really tough. If you do need to cut costs, then look, be really open and say, we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to go from here to here, and this is going to be really tough. And you can share your sense of unease about doing that, but we also want from you a sense of hope. We want you to be able to say, look, this is going to be really hard, but here's what I stand for. And I know if we all gang together, we can rally together around these principles, then I know we're going to be able to do this together. I know we're going to get through and we're going to be successful. So leaders now, it's not about motherhood statements. It's not about, you know, these corporate comms teams. Sorry for anyone out there in corporate comms land. I'm not suggesting you don't write great stuff. But at the moment, we need authentic leadership. We need people who, hand on their heart, believe in what they're saying and are there for their people. And so I would definitely say, if you are thinking about how do I communicate, get on Zoom and, you know, have that communication ready to go, but speak from the heart and tell people what's really going on.
Thanks, Dan. We've got another question here. Wondered about change and cost and the collateral. Often change means those not performing get uncomfortable and disruptive, particularly in these uncertain times. So do you have any tips for managing this situation?
Yeah, and I think it's a similar tip, which is get close to all your people. You know, if there are people who you know who are going to struggle, and we are going to touch on this in the next session, actually. There's a lot around resilience and motivation through these times that we'll touch on next week. But a really big tip here is getting closer to your people to really understand what's going on for them. And look, I don't know that there's a lot of people that would fit this bill, but there'll be some who'll really relish the idea of this change. And I'd say, great, pop them into those working groups. But also in those working groups, put some of your best people who might really struggle, who might be really challenged. Because being in the working group means they'll have a sense of control. They'll have a greater sense of certainty because they're being part of the change rather than it happening to them. There's no simple answer for motivating people in great times. So there's hardly going to be one during challenging times. But as a leader, I would say get much, much closer to all your people. Talk to them far more than you used to. Understand what's going on for them. You know, have really spend more time having deeper conversations and be more curious, which again, we're going to touch on in the future sessions. But particularly in this frame, when you know what your cost target might have to be, and you know what your guiding principles are and how you're going to, you know, the values you're going to uphold in this, tell everyone about that straight away. Share it really openly and say, this is how much we're going to have to save. And look, I don't know how we're going to do it. We have to do it. But these are the guiding principles that we're going to use. And we're going to navigate through this together.
Yeah. Dan, there's probably about 3 other questions. I'm just conscious of time as well. Reese had loved the example of the little moments and them really mattering. Do you have a corporate example that springs to mind at all in that particular sort of realm?
Yeah, look, I'll give you an example from someone who I really admire as a leader. He's the outgoing CEO of IAG, the company behind NRMA, etc. He shared with his team this little story that, in times of challenge, he really focuses on what's important to him. And he recalled a story of one day he got a phone call that his son had fallen off a piece of gym equipment at school and hurt himself and was unconscious and getting driven to hospital. And he said, look, there are times in the office now where I get stressed, but they're never like that moment when I was driving across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, speeding, trying to get to the hospital. And, his whole point here was everyone in this room, this was to his leadership team, everyone in this room, you will get stressed. You'll feel uncertain and unsafe, and you'll get frustrated. And those moments are going to feel like they really matter, but be really clear. This is work. It's not family. It's not the most important thing for you. And for a leader to be able to take that sort of step forward and share that vulnerability and that example, it really helped for everyone else to get a sense of what was important in that time. Now, other simple examples I've experienced are just people coming up and asking how you're going. Sending a card. I don't know about you, but I don't receive a lot of handwritten cards. But I did a project one day and we got a really great result, and I got a handwritten card just saying thank you from my boss at the time. And it's a really simple but really special gesture. Anyone who's looking for more simple examples like that, Dan Ariely has quite a lot in some of his books that I'd highly recommend on motivation. And one of the key things he found was it's far more beneficial to send someone a pizza to say thank you to their family when they're at home at night than it is to give them a pay rise. And I know that sounds, everyone will sort of hear that and go, no, that's not really true. That the research shows that those gestures that have a bit more meaning and are a bit different have a much bigger impact on our motivation.
Yeah. And Dan Ariely has some fantastic TED Talks as well, doesn't he, Dan, that everyone can access?
Yeah, I definitely recommend having a look at Dan's work. And he's got some really simple, easy books to read that have real life examples.
Yeah, brilliant. Where do you think the line is for leaders on transparency versus avoiding the fear and panic that comes from full disclosure of, a commercial situation or a client situation? What's your take on that?
The caution I'd always give here is, and this is something that we sort of leaders do a lot of, which is, well, if I tell them this, they'll be terrified, and so I won't tell them anything. Remember when you were a little kid and there was a creak or a noise and you got scared, you thought the boogie monster was coming to get you? It wasn't the boogie monster you were scared of, it was not knowing what the hell that was. It's the unknown that really terrifies you. So in this time, my question would be, how many of your people expect that there will be no change in your business? How many of your people think that nothing's wrong, that the world's fine, everything's as it was 6 months ago, and everything's going to be okay? My guess is that almost none of your people, the people who do think like that, I'd be saying they've got other problems and questions you should be checking in on. But every single one of our people now know that there's something wrong, and they know things are going to have to change. And I'll give you the tip, almost all of them are terrified that they're going to get the phone call that they're about to lose their job. That's just the absolute reality of where we are right now. So my question would be, not telling them, is that going to help them deal with that fear or not? My guess is not telling them is actually a signal that we are going to make big change and it's so bad that we can't tell you about it. Now that's a fear that you've got to balance and say, well, which of those two do I think's actually worse? Being upfront, open and be clear, or just leave them in the dark and and hope they're okay. From my experience, it's always better to be open and upfront. It's always better to tell people as soon as you can, look, this is the state of play. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but we've got to make some changes. And doing that clearly upfront's the important thing. The second thing, and I also reiterate it, is your guiding principles, what you stand for as a leader, is the thing that gives them certainty. If you said to them, we're going to have to cut costs by X%, and they think you're a ruthless demagogue who's going to fire everybody, then yeah, that's going to really scare them. Whereas if they know you're a principled leader and you really care about your team and you're there for everyone, then telling them that you're going to have to reduce costs won't necessarily incite the fear that you might worry about. It might be the case that they actually go, well, I know we've got to do that, but I also know that, you know, Jess is a really strong leader and she's here for us and she looks after us. So I'm sure we'll work through this together. And so it's really having that balance between this is who I am as a leader and what I stand for, and this is the reality, the commercial reality of what we're dealing with. And having those two things open and upfront, I think, is the way to go.
Yeah, that's a great answer. We'll finish off with just one last question, and any other questions we haven't got to, we will reach out to you just individually. Adrian has said that I like the shepherd example, but how is the best way to manage insubordinates or people who are unwilling to follow the changes?
Yeah, and that's a really challenging piece. There are people who will opt out, and my question will be, can you let them? You know, if we think about we're building a movement, not a reaction, there's a real question, and this is part of the process that we always take our clients through here, is setting up this this sense of the challenge is real, the problems we have to solve are big, these are the principles we're taking forward, and this is our strategy, this is where we're headed. Now, if there are people who don't want to play in that, there are people who are opting out of that, then part of it might be that you have to let them. You have to give them that opportunity to leave and to opt out. And that might be challenging, but forcing people into this sort of a change and making people come along the journey will absolutely not work. You know, if we think about what's going to happen, you're going to have to make really tough decisions about where to stop spending money. You know, are we going to keep the biscuits in the coffee room or not? Are we everyone going to keep a car park or not? You're going to have to make some tough calls around some of these sorts of things. And what will almost certainly happen is if the people who you have forced to go through this and who don't buy in, they will white ant at every possible chance anything that you do. They will try and tear down and pick holes and everything, and they become a cancerous sort of growth within your business that can be really challenging. So leadership's not always easy. There's tough decisions you'll need to make. And part of these tough decisions will be if there's people who won't change the mindset, there's people who won't come on the journey, then part of that tough decision is you as a leader helping them to move on to protect everyone else in your business. You as a shepherd to say, look, this person, they don't want to be part of the flock, and keeping them in here makes us all weaker or more, puts us all in more danger, and therefore part of my job is to actually let that person go. The shepherd example is to all of your flock, and if that means the majority of people are safe because one person who doesn't want to be there has to leave, then that would be my suggestion to you. These are tough times and they're tough decisions to make, but that's leadership.
Thanks, Daniel. Luke, I might throw to you just to sort of wrap the session.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Thanks, Jess, too, for grabbing those questions. There's a couple of comments in there too in the chat box, which we'll respond to as well. Thank you very much. I hope everyone's got something out of that. We move on to resilience next week, I think, which is obviously, as we go further into COVID and the recovery, it's a key factor. So hopefully you can join us again. Thank you for everyone who attended. Hope you got something out of it, and a big thanks to Daniel as well. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.